Okay, hi everyone. I'm going to try to answer the questions that I see most commonly asked about routing the UI24R to a DAW and back to the UI24R. Maybe you're just looking to do one of these two things, but hopefully this video will answer both of those for you. If you've not watched Danny's video on the matter yet, he has a very good one. So I'm going to try to clear up those questions for users who have not done this yet. So first off, it's very important that you understand the routing of this device. So if we go ahead and take a look at the chart I made here, what you can see is what you might think is intuitive is not always the case. So some people select input 1 as channel 1 on their DAW, and they're surprised when they aren't getting what they expect to come out in their recordings. So the way that the UI24R is set up is it is a 32 by 32 recording interface. So this routing is fixed. You cannot change the output routing from the UI24R. So the way it works is the master left fader, so that's post fader, will go to input 1 on your DAW. The master right will go to input 2. Your auxes, 1 will start at 3 all the way up through 8, which will be input 10. And then your hardware inputs are 1 through 20. These are the ones you're most commonly going to be using, are input 11 through 30 on your DAW inputs. And then your RCA inputs, or your line in inputs is what they're labeled as, are input 31 and 32 on your DAW side. So looking at logic, if I want to record my first input, my first XLR 1/4-inch combi jack, I will choose input 11. That's what I'm recording here today. So right now I'm just looking at a signal because I'm recording it in QuickTime as well. But if I would hit the record button, now I'm recording audio and you can see my waveform starting. And if I go into my menu here, I have all 32 inputs, so I can record any of those things. Now, if I choose input 1, that's my master left, you'll see I'm now getting no level. My meter is falling down because there's nothing here. And that's simply because my fader is not sending anything to the master output. So if I raise this fader up, and now I'm getting signal to the master outs, if I go back over into Logic, you'll see that now I'm getting a signal. That's my master left channel. Similarly, if I choose input 3, that's my aux 1. I now have no signal again here in Logic. To get signal to Logic, I'll have to go back over to my UI24R, and I'm going to go ahead and go to my sends. Here is my input 1, which I've labeled mic on channel 1. And if I send that to aux 1, now we're going to see over in Logic that I'm getting signal on input 3. Now, most of the time when we're recording, we're going to take it direct off of the input. If you want to record, say, your whole band and all the effects you have going on live, you can just set up a stereo recording of input 1 and 2, and you'll get everything right there on that recording. Maybe you want to record the master outs on 1 and 2, and then record all of your band inputs as well individually. So you have kind of the whole mix on 1 and 2, and then you have the other individual inputs on all of, everywhere else. And maybe you even put up a couple crowd mics to, get the audience reaction in the recording as well. It just depends what you're trying to do. So it's important to understand how the patching works on the UI24R. So as I mentioned, your inputs 11 through 30 are these 20 physical inputs. This top row is always a physical input on this screen here in our patching. These are the actual channels on your mixing interface. I've labeled channel 1 mic. However, if I had disabled this input altogether, so now if I go back to my main mix screen, you'll notice my gain fader is gone because I have nothing to control the gain on. I have not patched an input to this channel, and therefore I'm getting no signal on my meter below. However, if I go back into Logic, you'll see I'm still recording. Well, I'm actually not recording, but I'm still getting signal on input 11 because input 11 is hardwired from right after the gain stage to the output on your USB interface. So I'm still getting a signal here. Similarly, had I routed mic 1, physical input 1, to channel 2, you'll see that now I'm getting a signal on channel 2. I have not changed my input, however, on logic, and I'm still getting a signal because it doesn't care what my UI24 is seeing in terms of what channel something is on. It's looking at the physical input. Input 1 is coming in on input 11 according to the routing matrix I shared earlier. Now when we look at output routing, you'll actually find it's much simpler because output 1 correlates to DAW1, output 2 to DAW2, and so on, all the way up through the 32 possible outputs from our DAW into the Ui24r. We'll look at that now. So now let's say you want to send something you've recorded back to the Ui24r. This is handy in virtual sound check, or if you want to run some tracks back to your board, maybe some backing tracks, or if you want to run some plugins live, you could do it this way as well. So what you're going to do in this case, I've set my output to 1. Okay, you're going to again have 32 outputs to choose from. You're going to want to probably use a mono output unless you're using a stereo input source. And this time, any of these 32 outputs will work. So how do I get this to go through the Ui24r? So again, I have input 11, which is really input 1, physical hardware input 1, coming to output 1. So now to route this back through the Ui24r, this is what I need to do. I'm going to go into my routing, and instead of having mic 1, okay, my hardware input 1, go to channel 1, which again I named mic, I'm going to go to my USB DAW 1 through 16. So I chose output 1. So here's output 1. I'm going to assign that to channel 1. And you're going to see, okay, now that I have enabled input monitoring, I have signal here. Okay, I didn't before because Logic was recording and it wasn't allowing us to actually see the input. So now we have an input there. You can see that sound, and if I would turn on my speaker here, it's going to have some latency, but you'll be able to hear it. I don't know if you can hear that echo or not. Okay, so that's how we get audio from our DAW back in to our device. And if I wanted to, this will be an instance where you could go in and you could add some plugins. You can do it if you have a nice computer under 8 milliseconds using something like Live Professor or Waves Multi-Rack Native. They both work very nicely, or MainStage even works pretty well for this. If you're just doing your own instrument, that's fine. If you want to do it on, few inputs, it starts to get more and more taxing, but that's going to be up to your computer. So if you're going to do plugins, just keep in mind the latency. If you're running some things through the computer and some things not, in certain cases that's fine. But let's say you put a mic on your snare top and snare bottom, and you want to run a plugin on one and not the other. You're going to have a latency difference, which can cause phase issues. So you need to compensate for that if you're going to do something like that. The plugins work nicely, but keep it simple. They work nice on like an aux. If you want to run a reverb or something, you can run compressors and stuff in that kind of time. I found it to be pretty acceptable for front of house use, and even in most cases, musicians aren't going to notice it if you have a pretty stout computer and can do it quickly. Okay, I think that kind of wraps up all of the possibilities. If you have any questions about that, let me know.